eventually have their effect on the Iranian system that we're looking for.
I just want to come in very quickly on that with really 2 points. I think it's important to, leaving aside the psychology, I think it's important to understand what a full-blown balance of payments crisis would look like, right? And I'm just going to quickly sketch that out. And the reason, and I want to give a little bit of an indication first, right? I'm assuming that a successful sanctions program would also ultimately prevent Iran from using swap facilities or having access to the IMF in the case of that balance of payments crisis, right? And the IMF was basically set up because balance of payments and currency crises are so politically destabilizing that you need a lender of last resort to prevent social collapse in a country undergoing one. So if you are using one to create social collapse, you presumably would want to take those tools off the table. But without those tools, right, Iran, from one day to the next, will no longer be able to pay for imports at all. So everything that can't be produced domestically can't be bought, right? Except for absent political will in certain exporting countries, right? It will have all of its lines of credit withdrawn. It won't be able to engage in trade. It won't have access to the trade credit system. You'll be unable to insure or charter vessels that are taking payment from Iran. Its ability to participate in the global economy will end. And I think that's quite a striking thing that people haven't necessarily fully thought through. And it would be very, very, very politically destabilizing. It's worth for just a second dwelling on the situation of Greece. Right? So Greece is a developed country with the full support of the European community and the international financial institutions and the IMF that went through, which has a currency that everyone in the world will accept. And even in the course of the Greek crisis, there was a period when Greece was unable to secure imports of oil because people wouldn't trade with them because of the risk that they might end up in a balance of payments crisis and have to leave the euro. So it was actually, for a period of time, very difficult for Greece to find anyone who wouldn't sell them oil because of these practical issues of getting paid. The situation in Iran will be infinitely worse. So I think this is actually quite a frightening prospect for the Iranian regime, or should be.
Well, Paul, people might around the table say, Paul, that's terrible because it's going to create a humanitarian crisis. It's going to hurt the Iranian people. We're not trying to hurt the Iranian people. We're trying to hurt the Iranian regime. So why would we go that far? We don't want to go that far. And I guess, just to address that point really quickly, first is, look, there's not a choice between good and bad options. There's a choice between bad and worst options. And if the worst option involves a nuclear armed Iran, the Middle East under a nuclear trigger, and the prospect of a nuclear exchange, that would be the worst option. Second worst option would be, military strikes and war to prevent that. So we're looking at a range of really bad options, of which crippling economic sanctions is the least bad option. And hopefully breaking the will of Khamenei and reaching a negotiated settlement. The other thing is just more of a technical point, which I hope people understand. Iran's got billions of dollars worth of local currency locked up in these accounts. So they sell their oil, they get paid in local currency, in yen, rupees, and Chinese yuan, and Turkish lira. It's all sitting in these accounts. And under U.S. law, the banks can only allow Iran to spend that money locally. So Iran is in a position today to actually buy all the food and medicine it needs using local currency sitting in escrow accounts. From Japan. So Japan has a first-class pharmaceutical industry with every Western, European, and U.S. drug available under license. So they can buy American, Western European, Japanese pharmaceuticals from Japan using yen in that account. If they don't like the prices in Japan, drugs are expensive, high-end drugs. There's a huge generic drug industry in India. They can spend rupees that are sitting in those locked-up accounts and buy generic drugs from India. They can buy food from Turkey, from India. They have all the money they need to actually satisfy their people's humanitarian needs. Now, if the regime has decided not to spend that money, that's the regime's decision and the regime's fault. And we have to understand that sanctions themselves are not preventing Iran from buying food and medicine. Now, some would argue maybe they should. I will address that argument. Maybe we need to take Iran literally to the point where they can't buy food and medicine. The fact is even if you don't accept that argument, sanctions can create a balance of payments crisis that prevents Iran from buying the critical equipment, machinery that it needs to run its factories. prevent the foreign exchange that it needs to support its currency, and still at the same time have billions of dollars worth of local currency to buy food and medicine. And it's an essential point on the humanitarian side. It really gets lost in this debate.
And that brings us to the end of our allotted time this afternoon. Could I ask one final piece of color commentary, I think, on the counterfactual idea that Paul laid out earlier. So it's striking to me that the shock that Secretary Kerry, for example, described was the shock of having 1 million or 1.5 million barrels of oil removed from the market. And the counterfactual, when you think about it, we've had 2 countries testing nuclear weapons for the first time in the last 15 years, Pakistan and North Korea. Pakistan has conducted a series of spectacular attacks against its neighbor, almost gone to war against it. North Korea has conducted spectacular attacks in 2010. That the counterfactual way, and I think even thinking of it in terms of a risk premium, is a very generous way, a very hopeful way to think about how bad the counterfactual would be. That what we're talking about here is so small potatoes compared to the risk down the road. It's just astounding to me. If you please join me in thanking John, Paul, and Mark, and thanking SAFE, and thanking